Rain tapped against the windows as blue and red lights flashed outside. My heart pounded, not from fear, but disbelief. I never imagined a neighborhood fine could bring armed officers to my front porch. All over a $3,900 charge we never owed. Before I show you how justice silenced power, stay with me till the end. The morning began like any other. I was pouring coffee while my wife, Serena, opened the blinds to let in the soft light. We had just returned from a short trip upstate, our front yard still dusted with fallen leaves. The house felt calm, until we saw the envelope tucked under the doormat, thick, official, stamped with the HOA's crest in bold red ink. We both knew trouble had been brewing for months. Ever since Serena reported a board member for misappropriating funds, the HOA had turned cold. Letters began to appear, warnings, threats, and now, this. Inside the envelope was a formal violation notice and an invoice, $3,900. The accusation: unauthorized exterior modifications to our home, which we never made. Serena scanned the document and laughed bitterly. "They're testing us," she said, flipping the page to find more fabricated violations. "This isn't just about paint color. They're trying to bury us in fines until we fold." But we weren't the folding kind. The irony was, just weeks earlier, a judge had ruled in our favor in a different HOA matter. A seal on official court paper made it clear we had standing. But apparently, they didn't care. The next day, Serena called the HOA office. The clerk on the other end pretended not to know about the fine. Then a voicemail arrived, clipped, robotic, and direct. Failure to pay within 48 hours will result in legal escalation and enforcement. It felt personal now. They weren't just bending rules, they were weaponizing them. That evening, I reviewed our home security footage. A board member had entered our yard without notice while we were away, clipboard in hand, snapping photos. He wasn't a city inspector. He wasn't even invited. Just a neighbor with power he thought couldn't be challenged. That was our line in the sand. Serena pulled out the sealed court order we had won 2 months earlier. "If they think this is going to be easy, they forgot I keep receipts." She smiled, but there was tension behind it. This wasn't just a fine. It was harassment. A test to see if we'd back down, or fight again. 2 days passed. We didn't pay the fine. We didn't respond to the threats. We were preparing to file a counterclaim when the doorbell rang. Flashing red and blue lights reflected on our glass. 2 uniformed officers stood at the porch, hands resting casually near their belts. I opened the door slowly. "Are you the homeowner?" one asked. "Yes," I replied, firm. "Is there a problem?" They explained they were here due to a report from the HOA, alleging that we were in violation of civil code and refused compliance. My chest tightened. Serena stepped beside me, silent, then disappeared into the study without a word. While the officers spoke in polite but firm tones, Serena returned, holding a thick envelope. She handed it to the senior officer. "This is a signed judge's order, ruling in our favor against this HOA. This fine is void, and any enforcement action against us is contempt of court." She said it calmly, but you could hear the steel behind her voice. The officer opened the envelope. As he scanned the pages, his posture shifted. His eyes caught the embossed seal near the bottom. He glanced at his partner, then back at us. "We weren't made aware of any court ruling," he said, voice quieter now. He folded the papers slowly, his expression turning pale. "We'll need to make a few calls." As the police car rolled away, its tail lights vanishing beyond the hedge line, the silence it left behind was heavier than the visit itself. I stood motionless on the porch, feeling the cool wood beneath my feet, while Serena slowly closed the door. The weight of the confrontation lingered in the air, like a storm cloud refusing to drift. Our house, once a safe haven, now felt like a contested line in a silent war. We sat at the kitchen table without speaking, the unopened mail stacked like small grenades between us. Somewhere beyond the walls, sprinklers ticked on in a neighbor's yard, mocking us with their normalcy. But inside our home, everything had shifted. The law had been summoned to intimidate us, and while the judge's order had stopped them for now, the message was clear: the HOA wasn't finished. Serena laid out the documents again, this time more carefully, as if handling evidence from a crime scene. The court order. The HOA bylaws. The zoning maps we'd requested months earlier. Each piece was a layer in a puzzle we hadn't asked to build, but now had no choice but to finish. The house remained quiet, save for the faint sound of our dog's paws tapping across the hardwood floor, pacing like we were. Later that evening, I walked the edge of our lot, tracing the invisible line that separated us from HOA-controlled land. A row of ornamental bushes had once been a friendly divider. Now, they looked like battlements. At the far end of the yard, a violation under review sign had been staked into the soil. It hadn't been there that morning. No one had knocked. They had come quietly, like thieves, and left their brand behind. The next morning brought another surprise. A crew from the city utility service arrived, unannounced, claiming a routine inspection of our water line. I watched from the front steps as they dug a narrow trench near the mailbox, shrugging when I asked for paperwork. Their truck bore no official city seal. Their clipboards had no insignia. I made a note to check with the city council, but deep down, I already knew who sent them. That afternoon, our mailbox overflowed. 6 separate notices, each stamped with HOA letterhead, each with slight variations in language. One demanded immediate payment. Another threatened lien placement. A third invited us to, voluntarily, appear at a disciplinary board hearing. The dates were conflicting. The charges, incoherent. But they were relentless. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, designed to overwhelm, not convince. Serena opened a file on her laptop labeled Documentation. I watched as she began logging every event, the letters, the surprise visits, the footage from the driveway camera. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp. She wasn't just defending us, she was preparing to expose them. Every file, every timestamp, every printed copy added weight to a case they thought we wouldn't build. They didn't know who they were dealing with. That evening, I spoke with a neighbor, a quiet man named Howard, who rarely joined HOA meetings but always nodded politely when we passed. He confessed, almost guiltily, that he'd received similar harassment when he objected to a dues increase last year. "They try to break you slow," he said. "Until you move, or go quiet." He looked over his shoulder before walking back into his house, leaving me with a thought I couldn't shake. We weren't alone. The sun dipped low behind the rooftops, casting long shadows across our driveway. I stared at the cracks in the pavement, remembering when this had all just been a peaceful cul-de-sac. A place where kids played on scooters and neighbors waved from across the street. Now, it felt like a battlefield, but not one of noise and chaos. One of silence, papers, and quiet threats that came dressed in legalese. As night fell, I locked the front gate, then the side one, then checked every latch and window. Not out of fear for physical harm, but because I knew they'd be back. Not with fists or noise, but with envelopes, bylaws, and manipulation. They would come until we bent, broke, or disappeared. But we had something they didn't: truth, time, and a judge's seal that no amount of bullying could erase. It was still dark when we parked outside the county courthouse, the sky a dull slate, streetlights flickering in the cool silence of dawn. Serena had barely slept the night before. Neither had I. The air was thick with the weight of everything we'd documented, months of pressure, harassment, and paper warfare, now distilled into a single folder that sat between us in the car like a loaded weapon. Our truth, bound in ink and certified by law. Inside, the halls echoed with the hollow sound of distant footsteps. We weren't the first ones there, but it felt like we were the only ones with a purpose. A clerk led us to a small hearing room, no wood-panel drama, just pale walls and cold chairs. The HOA representative arrived 10 minutes late, flanked by 2 attorneys in pressed suits and smug expressions. But I saw the tension in their eyes the moment Serena stood up with that envelope in her hands. We didn't speak in legalese. We spoke in facts. Dates. Copies. Video stills. HOA notices layered over court orders. Serena's voice was steady, precise. The judge, a calm woman with steel-gray hair and tired eyes, nodded slowly as each page landed before her. The mood in the room shifted with every new piece of proof. We weren't 2 homeowners complaining anymore. We were plaintiffs armed with their own rules turned against them. Halfway through the hearing, the HOA's lead attorney tried to object, something about procedural delay or jurisdiction. But the judge raised her hand gently and said, Let them finish. It wasn't just a legal victory forming in that moment, it was a moral one. For every homeowner who had been silenced or scared off, we were now the voice. The judge read over the deed, the original fine, the sealed ruling they had ignored. Her ruling was short but thunderous. The fine was nullified. Further HOA enforcement would be considered contempt of court. The HOA would cover our legal costs, and a formal investigation into board practices would begin. No dramatic slams of a gavel. Just a printed decision and an order to file it publicly. But as we left that small room, it felt as if a dam had cracked. By noon, the news had already spread. A neighbor texted us a photo. Someone had taped a copy of the court decision to the HOA bulletin board near the clubhouse. A bold black circle had been drawn around the judge's seal. "I didn't do it," the message read, "but thank you." Another neighbor dropped off cookies. A woman we barely knew nodded solemnly while walking her dog and said, "About time someone stood up to them." That evening, Serena and I sat on the back porch, the air finally free of tension. The leaves rustled, not as an omen, but as applause from the trees. We weren't heroes. We didn't fight in wars or hold rallies. But we stood our ground. In a place where silence is often safer, we'd chosen the harder path, to speak, to fight back, to endure. The next day, the same officer who had once arrived at our door to question us now showed up to serve a notice, this time to the HOA president. I watched from my driveway as he knocked on their door, handed them the envelope, and left without a word. The roles had reversed. The seal that once meant fear for us now represented authority, our authority. Over the next week, quiet changes began. The HOA meetings were postponed. Their official emails stopped coming. The board president resigned, for health reasons, though the community knew better. The aggressive notices vanished from neighbors' mailboxes. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, the balance of power had shifted. And still, every time I passed that judge's seal framed on our kitchen wall, I remembered what Serena said that first night, "They think we'll forget." But I remember everything. That seal wasn't just a stamp. It was a mark left by truth on a wall once pressed by fear. The HOA had tried to rewrite our story, but we had published the ending ourselves. The sun hung low over the neighborhood as I stepped onto the community hall's patio, its golden rays slipping through the slats of the pergola like the quiet return of balance. There was no red tape lining our walkway today, no strange vehicles parked at odd angles, no silent observers lurking near property lines. Just the sound of distant children laughing, a lawnmower buzzing 2 streets away, and the soft rustle of tree leaves in the breeze. For the first time in months, the air no longer whispered with paranoia. Inside the hall, chairs were lined up for the monthly community meeting, one that would run without the HOA board, whose structure had now collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. A neutral management agency had stepped in, under court supervision. The former board members had scattered, some resigning quietly, others too proud to show their faces again. The community had changed, not through protest, not through violence, but through patience, record-keeping, and truth. I sat near the back, blending in among the rows of neighbors, some familiar, others whose names I never knew. A woman 2 seats down nodded softly, her eyes carrying the tired kind of gratitude that needed no words. The new moderator opened the session with updates, utility schedules, upcoming repairs, things that once came buried under threats and fees. Now they were presented plainly, like they should have always been. Democracy had returned in the simplest, humblest way. Later that week, Serena and I walked along the lake trail behind our house, the same trail that once saw surveillance cameras installed without warning. The signs had been removed now. No more passive-aggressive language posted on wooden boards. No more fear of being reported for stepping too close to someone else's lot line. The ground beneath our feet felt different, not because it had changed, but because we had claimed our place on it. Near the shore, I paused beside an old metal gate that once separated our lot from what the HOA claimed was community bufferland. It was rusted, unused, more symbol than barrier now. I opened it slowly, letting it swing wide without resistance. Beyond lay our newly surveyed property, legally ours, finally respected. That sound, metal creaking open, echoed in my chest like a chapter turning. In the days that followed, letters began arriving, not threats, but thank yous. Some handwritten. One typed on yellow paper from an elderly couple down the street. "We've lived here 17 years, it read, and we always kept our heads down. You reminded us that standing up doesn't mean starting a fight, it means not backing down when one finds you." Serena read it aloud at the breakfast table, her hands trembling just slightly. But justice doesn't mean erasure. The HOA's legacy was still there, in the cracks of sidewalks never repaired, in the stories of neighbors fined for planting the wrong flowers. We couldn't undo the past. But we had opened a path forward. The neighborhood newsletter started including real community voices. Elections were scheduled, this time with actual voting. People spoke up, carefully, but confidently. We'd broken the silence. And silence was what they had always counted on. One evening, I visited the mailbox and found a large manila envelope. Inside was a certified copy of the court's final enforcement order, a permanent injunction against the HOA's former practices, with my name and Serena's on the first page. I stared at it under the porch light, letting the gravity settle. What started as a $3,900 fine had become a reckoning. The paper in my hand wasn't just proof of victory, it was proof that we had endured. Weeks later, I replaced the gate behind our property. Not with a wall or new chain, but with a custom archway carved from oak, reading simply, "Here we stood." Beneath it, the gravel path curved toward the lake, open for anyone to walk. The land had always been ours, but now the story was too. The scars left by the HOA hadn't vanished, but we had chosen to turn them into markers, of change, of resistance, of quiet strength. Serena stood beside me as we looked out over the water, the sun melting into orange behind the hills. Her hand found mine, and for a while, we said nothing. We didn't need to. The fear was gone. The letters had stopped. The officers hadn't returned. And the gate, the real one and the metaphorical, would never be locked again. We had won, not through anger, but by holding the line. And in doing so, we taught them all, truth sealed by law doesn't just end stories. It rewrites them.